for the last 3 decades in the airline industry. Along with the change also comes what we call as complexity. But complexity is something that we cannot duck from, we cannot avoid. What is important is that we need to be in a position to master that complexity and simplify the travel experience for customers as a whole. So in terms of complexity, so this is actually a video recording from NATS. NATS is an air traffic control company, and so what they have done is, this is basically just looking at traffic across Europe, and on a typical day in Europe, you have approximately 30,000 flights in the air on a daily basis. And if you look at the total nautical miles traveled, it's about 25 million nautical miles, which is about equal to the 100 round trips from Earth to the Moon and back. So the basic message is that the traffic has been growing at a very fast rate for the last several years, and this is going to continue for the next 20 years. So this is a graph from IATA that talks about the growth in passenger volumes. So if you go through this slide, what you typically find is that in the next 20 years, in fact less than 20 years, since this was created in 2017, what you're going to do is you'll see the air traffic volumes are going to almost double in the next 20 years. This is a big change, and this is a big impact on the airline industry. And this again adds to the overall complexity in terms of what we are dealing with. In the context of Sabre and marketplaces, a marketplace like Sabre, typically we provide what is known as a shopping service for travel agents and for online travel agencies. So towards that end, what we typically have found is that the shopping volumes, in terms of the shops that we generate on a daily basis based on agency requests, has been growing at an exponential rate. So last year in 2018, we did 170 billion shops in 2018. And the growth rate has ranged from 60% to 90% growth year over year. So even if I assume that the growth rate is only 60%, you're looking at 275 billion shops in 2019 at the end of the year. We also, in terms of peak transaction processing volumes, we're looking at 20,000 transactions per second. That's a peak volume that we process. In addition to that, the total number of itineraries that are returned from a shopping request, the total number of items that are returned exceeds 1.8 trillion on a monthly basis. So each month, we generate more than 1.8 trillion itineraries. And this is typically what is returned back to an OTA or to a travel agent. So this is one of our largest systems, and we spend a lot of time and effort in making the process very efficient. Now, one of the key things I'd like to point out is that one of the things that's also changed is that the airline revenue mix has also been changing over the last decade. So if you look at the last decade, what's typically happened is that the average base fare has actually gone down by approximately 1%. But at the same time, we have seen a growth in ancillary revenues to the tune of 40%. So ancillary sales have taken off in a big way. While that has grown 40%, the base fare has actually gone down by 1%. Now, according to companies like IdeaWorks and Cartrawler, they do a lot of research into the space. They basically estimated that at the end of last year, 2018, that the total ancillary sales across all airlines was $93 billion, which means that in 2019, at end of 2019, we would have crossed the $100 billion threshold for ancillary revenues. This leads to a very important point. The important message is that intelligent retailing is of fundamental importance in the airline industry going forward. Intelligent retailing is basically an extension of revenue management, where we look beyond the base fare and you want to be in a position to recommend not just the base fare, but the base fare plus ancillaries back to a customer to ensure that you can maximize your revenues and make sure that the information you provide is relevant for the customer. Okay. So talking briefly about travel complexity. Most of you know what I'm talking about on this slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we've seen an exponential increase in traffic volumes. We've also seen a large-scale increase in fares. Now, one of the big things that's going to happen with NDC. NDC is a new distribution capability from IATA. What is going to happen with NDC is that the fares are going to increase even more. Why is it going to increase even more? Because there are certain types of new fares that will be introduced with IATA NDC. For example, you'll have time of day specific fares. You would have date specific fares. And you would also have routing specific fares. So these three fare types will cause an even greater increase in terms of the number of fares being returned. So what all this means is that when you do a shop and when itineraries get returned to a travel agent or to an end consumer or an OTA, it's very important to be in a position to know what the best fare is. Not just the lowest fare, but the best fare for a specific consumer based on their preferences. The other area that's of gaining in importance is hotel content has always been fragmented, but then air content is also fragmented because of LCCs. There are a lot of LCCs that don't participate in a marketplace that's like in a GDS. So one of the key things that's important going forward is for us to be in a position to access this content so that the travel agency community can have access to this content at all times. One other area that's of growing importance is dynamic pricing and dynamic packaging. So dynamic pricing is a new standard that was established by IATA, actually by ATPCO, and we actually worked with ATPCO, and this was the new messaging standard was ratified in March of 2019 for airlines to promote dynamic prices into the marketplaces. So that's a new messaging standard that was ratified just 2 months ago. And this is going to lead to an even greater increase in private fares that marketplaces can have access to. And finally, last but not least, is payment systems. Payment systems a few years ago was pretty simple. You had just a few credit card companies, and then PayPal came along. But now there's been an explosion in terms of payment services from the likes of Android Pay and Apple Pay and Samsung Pay and so on. So these are some of the complexities that we at Sabre are dealing with, and we want to do what it takes to simplify the travel experience from an end consumer perspective. So one of the things to keep in mind is that even though this complexity exists in terms of data processing and the work that we have to do to support the airline community and the travel community, from an end consumer perspective, the view is very different. You know, they have been influenced by industries that don't work in the travel space. Companies like Apple, companies like Netflix. And so based on that, and Amazon, these are good examples. So based on that, they have an expectation that the consumer experience can be simplified regardless of the complexity. So this is gaining in importance. So the question is, how do we go about doing it? So this is the Apple example. Apple has a very well-defined design philosophy. It's focused on simplicity, and they raised the bar in terms of consumer expectations in terms of how to interact with the device, right? It also became the first trillion-dollar company. The second example is Netflix. Netflix, they do what I call as hyper-personalization. A few years back, Netflix was delivering content to consumers. They were basically based on location. It's all based on the actual location of an individual that they would actually do it. They've actually taken it to the next level where they no longer do it by location, but they base it on the type of movie you want to see. Whether you want to see a drama, whether you want to see an action movie, you want to see science fiction, and within that, there are certain classes of movies that will resonate with some customers and those that will resonate with other customers. So they introduced this one-to-one personalization in the context of Netflix and recommendations for movies, which I think is a big change that you're seeing. The other good example is Amazon. Amazon, as you know, for many years, they've had a recommendation engine that can recommend offers to you based on browsing history and what people have purchased, people like behavior patterns. The secret sauce to Amazon that they never tell you is a segmentation logic that they use. They have a unique segmentation logic based on any number of attributes that they would not divulge, that dictates a segmentation. So when you go to an Amazon site, you see information coming back that's very relevant to what Amazon thinks that you need and that you would buy. They also do employ a lot of machine learning techniques, and as most of you know, Amazon's recommendation engine generates about 35% of the company's revenues. It's a pretty big number. Last but not least is Starbucks. When I first saw this piece of information, I could not believe this slide. I didn't realize that Starbucks is in Dubai, and it looks very fancy. We don't have any of this. I've never been to a Starbucks like this in the United States. But they also do practice hyper-personalization. Starbucks' big claim is that they have 87,000 drink combinations that they can serve up in a short length of time when you go and ask for a coffee, right? So what exactly is intelligent retailing? So one of the key pillars that we are working on in the context of NDC and beyond NDC is what we are calling as intelligent retailing. It's basically selling the right bundle for the right customer at the right price at the right time from a supplier perspective. From a marketplace perspective, the viewpoint is the opposite. We want to be in a position to display this information to an agent so that you can comparison shop across all the different suppliers that are providing this data, so that it makes it easy for you to go ahead and make a selection. Okay. Now, when we talk about intelligent retailing, it is not just about the supplier, right? The supplier has an interest in terms of what they're trying to do, which in this case are the airlines or the hoteliers. But we also need to worry about TNCs and agencies, that they need to have access to content. Corporations are important because duty of care is important. It's also important to comply with corporate policy. Online booking tools are it's important because they need to have access to content. And finally, you have travelers who want to make sure that they have the right choice of air products that are shown to them so they can make a decision as to how to go ahead and make a purchase. So when we think about intelligent retailing, we don't think about intelligent retailing from a single dimension, but we think about it from all 5 dimensions that you see here. That's kind of how we view the situation. So the big question, this is our headquarters in South Lake. So the big question is how Sabre is shaping travel. So towards that end, what we typically tend to do is, with our deep industry knowledge, what we typically end up doing is painting a picture of the future and imagine so we are constantly reimagining the future of the business, reimagining the business of travel, and come back and say, these are things that we think are important to the industry. We hedge our bets, go ahead and build these solutions and launch them in the marketplace. So this, we think, is a very critical step, and this is one of the key things that we do as part of the Sabre Labs organization as well, working in close collaboration with the business units. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm part of the Sabre Labs organization. I head up an organization called Sabre Research, which is part of Sabre Labs. And within that organization, the main things we do is we focus on industry-first applications. I'll walk you through some of them as we go through this presentation. Second one is we also collaborate with Sabre teams because collaboration is a very critical component to understand what the requirements are from users, and then how do we go about building these solutions and delivering them in the marketplace. And then we also advance the conversation directly with our customers, so that they understand what these value propositions are, and we can also refine the value propositions over time. Okay? So just about everything we do is dictated by data. So data drives the business to a large extent. Data drives all the advanced decision support applications we build. So towards that end, we have more than 15 petabytes of data in the Sabre system. So this is basically a combination of booking data, ticketed data, shopping data, We also have a lot of industry data like the P100 data, DB1A data, DB2B data, weather data, and a whole host of other data that we also have in our databases. And this is kind of what is actually used for processing, so we can make some intelligent recommendations and support the applications that we actually develop. Also, I wanted to point out, shopping, as I mentioned earlier, is our largest system. We generate 300 terabytes of raw shopping data on a daily basis. And that actually goes into our big data appliance on a daily basis. So, as part of this talk, I'll try to highlight blockchain, big data, the role of artificial intelligence in NDC. Now, artificial intelligence and machine learning is a key initiative we have at Sabre. It's something we launched. We launched this as a program in 2018, and we also have a quarterly newsletter that goes out where we share information in terms of all the active work that we have going on in the AI ML space. Because we today live in an artificial intelligence enabled landscape. So the fundamental question is, how can you support process automation? How can you support cognitive insight? And how can you promote cognitive engagement? So we focus on all of that. And then finally, we have a focus on NDC, or the new distribution capability from IATA. And I'll spend a little bit more time talking through that. Regarding blockchain, I think there's a lot of hype around blockchain today. But I also think there's a role for blockchain because it is a very good mechanism to bring about trust, and also bring about a mechanism to build consensus, and has a key role to play in fulfillment. So this is the technology hype cycle. So this is a technology hype cycle as depicted by Gartner. So the whole idea here is that they look at various technologies, and this is a report they put out very recently. And what they typically do is look out at emerging technologies and basically ask the question, where exactly do they fit on the hype cycle? So the hype cycle consists of 5 stages, right? It starts with an innovation trigger, and then you have a lot of expectations that the technology is going to be great, and so there's a lot of buzz in the industry, there are a lot of people who claim to be working on it, and then what happens is you go through a process of disillusionment. This typically happens when you realize the models don't work, or if they work, the ROI does not exist. And then, in some cases, some of these emerging technologies will break out of that, and then you realize when you're reaching steady state, and you're realizing value from these applications. And that is a slope of enlightenment, and finally, you will reach steady state, which is a plateau of productivity. So this is I'll come back to this slide later. And one thing that's important to keep in mind is that NDC was launched in 2015. At that time, it was more of a tech trigger back then. I wouldn't necessarily call it an innovation trigger, but a technology trigger at that point in time. And it has gone through the cycle, and we believe that at this point in time, NDC is on the uptick and on the slope of enlightenment scale at this point in time. And that's kind of where we are. So let's talk a little bit about NDC and the importance of NDC. As most of you know, NDC is a new messaging standard. It's basically a mechanism for airlines to communicate directly with marketplaces. So that is the fundamental intent of NDC. And we at Sabre are totally committed to NDC. Why are we committed to NDC? The reason we are committed to NDC is because we want to make sure that we work with suppliers, airlines, and bring this content into the marketplace so that our travel agents have access to all the content that the suppliers want to provide. So this has been a work in progress in terms of where we are. We have gone through certification levels of level 1, level 2, and level 3, both as an IT provider as well as an aggregator. And as we think about innovating beyond NDC, our viewpoint is that we need to think about 3 dimensions in terms of NDC. We need to think about intelligent retailing. We need to think about distribution from an infinite content perspective. And finally, we need to think about fulfillment. because there are lots of impacts on fulfillment, and I'll cover that as we get through the slides. Okay. So if you think about, so as part of this presentation, what I'm going to do is talk about 6 major components of NDC. We'll talk about segmentation of data. We'll talk about recommendation engines, offer management, dynamic pricing and packaging. How do you normalize content in an NDC world? And also talk about more secure fulfillment, right? So these are the 6 topics I'll cover. And these are what I call as the beyond segmentation or the beyond NDC initiative at Sabre. This is basically taking an existing messaging standard, because the NDC 18.2 specification is currently what we have, and how do you take that existing messaging standard and how do you make it better, and how do you add value to your consumers, to your customers. So let me spend a minute talking about segmentation. Most of you know that revenue management was launched back in the 1980s when I was part of American Airlines at that time, and we launched the first revenue management system for American. But the intent of revenue management was, at that point in time, was to control the segmentation was all dictated by pricing. And the pricing-based segmentation is simply saying that you have booking classes, and so you will go ahead and forecast demand and do everything based on booking classes. So what has happened of late is what is becoming more important is knowing the context for travel. What RBD-based segmentation does not necessarily tell you is what is the context for travel. And the context for travel is very important, and this is what makes travel so different from other industries. This is what makes travel so different from walking into a Walmart or a Target or any other retail store. Because depending on the purpose of your trip, if it's a business trip, if it's a leisure trip where you're going on a short 3-day vacation with your wife, or if you're taking your children and your wife and you're visiting friends and relatives, this has a big impact in terms of what your unique preferences are. So this is kind of what we call as context-based segmentation. And this context-based segmentation can happen in 2 different scenarios. First one is when you have anonymous users. Typically when someone goes to an airline website, they don't want to say who they are. They don't want to say, my name is Bob Parker. What they typically would do is to go ahead and do anonymous shopping. But regardless whether you're a declared user or an anonymous shopper, you want to be in a position to give relevant content back to the consumer. So that is fundamentally what context-based segmentation does. And then, so once you have a recommendation engine, you will determine what the extras are. But ultimately, what you have to do is to give a response for a segment of 1. So this is really where the industry is headed. We want to start with the general population, then we want to do segmentation based on context, is what we call as trip-purpose segmentation, and then we want to basically generate the recommended bundles, and then be able to personalize it for a specific user based on their specific preferences. And that is what we call as personalization for a segment of 1. So in terms of the recommendation engine, what is most important from an offer perspective is that depending on the purpose of the trip, the kind of offers that get created are very different, as you can see on the slide, right? They're very different from one to the other. So the intent is we want to be in a position to bring about mass customization so that we are in a position to provide offers for a segment of 1. So in the context of offer management, there are 2 viewpoints that we take. What you see on the left is the airline viewpoint in terms of how do I generate the right offer and how do I promote that offer back to an airline website, or how do I promote that back to the marketplace, like the Sabre marketplace. That is one viewpoint. The second point of view we also take, because we are also an aggregator and we have a large marketplace called Sabre. What we also do is when we get this federated content from multiple suppliers, we need to determine how to normalize the content and how to display that on a Sabre Red 360 workspace so that a travel agent can do comparison shopping and make it easy for them to go ahead and book travel for corporate travel, for example. So we look at it from both perspectives. We look at it from a supplier perspective that you see on the left, and then we look at it from a marketplace perspective in terms of how can you normalize content. And there's a lot of science that goes into normalizing content. So we are in a position to come back and value the content and come back and say this content is better than that content. And you need to keep in mind this is a complicated problem. Why is it complicated? Because the content that is being returned to the marketplace is not homogeneous. It's non-homogeneous content that is coming into the marketplace. So we actually use some fairly sophisticated techniques in terms of normalizing this content in the marketplace. Okay. I want to take a step back and talk about dynamic pricing. Now, dynamic pricing, there's a lot of interest in the airline community for dynamic pricing. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was a proponent of using dynamic pricing at some point in time, but we ended up launching what we call as dynamic availability. So dynamic availability is something that we launched 3 years ago, which gets most of the benefit from dynamic pricing without all the process changes that are needed. The whole idea of dynamic availability is to be in a position to set inventory controls in real time based on competitive market conditions and to generate incremental revenue. Dynamic pricing takes it a step further where you don't modify inventory controls, but you modify the price point and you create a private fare. This private fare is what we now call as a Tariff 37 based on the new specification document that we worked with ATP for. So towards that end, there are many airlines out there that have expressed a strong interest in pursuing dynamic pricing. There's a working group in Washington, D.C. that we are a part of. We are the co-chairs of the working group, and there are about 15 airlines, and all the aggregators, it's not just us, Amadeus, Travelport, Fairlogics, and a whole bunch of others also come to these meetings, and we have hammered out a consensus in terms of what that messaging standard is. So with that new messaging standard, the intent is a supplier can push their private content, their dynamic price into the marketplace for a travel agent to consume. Okay. And the next thing I need to, the last thing that goes beyond dynamic pricing is dynamic packaging. There's also been a lot of interest in the industry in terms of dynamic packaging. So the whole idea of dynamic packaging is how do you create a bundle that is not just the air ancillary bundle, but you're looking at air and hotel, maybe rental car, cruise line, and so on. So there's a mechanism by which you can do segmentation for hotel, you can do segmentation for rental car, along the lines of what I showed you for air. So once you do that, we are actually building a recommendation engine that we hope to demonstrate if you come to the Sabre SPX conference in June. We are planning on demonstrating this capability at that point in time. So in terms of what the dynamic, but the mantra is the same. We start with we start with the population at large. We do the segmentation on the fly in real time, without asking any questions from the consumer. Once the segmentation is done, we create the recommended offer, and then we do the personalization after that. So that's fundamentally how that works, just like what I had explained before. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. When we spoke about Beyond NDC, I spoke about 3 major pillars. Besides intelligent retailing, we also have what I call as content normalization. Content normalization is a very important thing for us. Well, the whole intent of content normalization is that we want to make sure we have access to content that does not currently exist in the Sabre marketplace. So what do I mean by that? So on the one hand, it means bringing in LCC content by having connectivity to LCC carriers so they can return what the price points are for their specific itineraries. Second, in the context of hotels, we have a content platform, and we have just enabled, we have signed contracts, and we are bringing in content from Expedia. There's an EAN network. We're bringing in data from Booking.com, Beds Online, and a whole host of other aggregators who are providing content to us. So this data is coming into the Sabre system. Once this data comes into the Sabre system, we have developed some very sophisticated algorithms that are what we call as a tree search that can basically normalize the content. So from a travel agent perspective, they can do comparison shopping. they can see the same rate from Booking.com versus Expedia versus Sabre and Beds Online. They can see all this information side by side, and you know what is included in the rate and what is not included in the rate by aggregator source. So this actually is what we are doing in the context of comparison shopping. This actually will be launched very shortly in the next few months. It's actually right now we are in the process of testing it out. The launch is very soon in terms of what happens here. And this is very significant because Sabre always had access to a large number of hotels, but now we have an exponential increase in the number of in terms of the amount of content that is flowing into the Sabre marketplace. So in many ways, when you think about NDC, it's not just about intelligent retailing, it's also about distribution and fulfillment. I'll talk about fulfillment in a second. This is fulfillment. So one of the things we've been experimenting with in 2018 and 2019 is blockchain. So what exactly is blockchain? I know there's a lot of hype around blockchain. At the end of the day, blockchain is very simplistic. It's nothing but a ledger, the smart contracts, and a currency, right? That's basically what it is. So we have actually developed an application to demonstrate how blockchain can actually be used. And what we call here is interline ticketing. It's very important to keep in mind that even though the NDC messaging standard has progressed, there are lots of open issues about how settlement will work for interlining carriers. Because in a post-NDC world, all the interline ticketing settlement will have to happen directly between the airlines. There will not be a middleman out there like a BSP or anyone else to support that, right? So given that situation, we built this is just for demonstration purposes. So the whole idea is that when a ticket is issued, we create a block on the blockchain. When a block is created on the blockchain, that actually represents a ticket. And once the payment is received, what we do is we take the cash, the form of payment that was received, we convert that to a cryptocurrency. There are different cryptocurrencies. There are those that are also pegged to the US dollar, so they're totally stable. So once you do that, both the validating carrier and the interlining carrier receive a copy of the ticket. And the validating carrier also gets the currency, and they also know immediately, the interlining carrier also knows immediately in terms of the amount that is owed to the interlining carrier from the validating carrier, right? So typically today the settlement for interline ticketing takes how many days? It takes 90 days on the average. Between 60 and 90 days is typically what it takes. So in this new world, with this kind of approach, the settlement can actually happen a day after the last segment has been flown, right? So this is a big. Now, there are pluses and minuses to blockchain. Blockchain is not for all applications. We are using a traditional blockchain infrastructure here that we actually developed, and you've seen information in the literature like IBM's Hyperledger and others, where they make claims about the transaction processing per second, what the peak volumes are. It's not for high volume transactions. It can only go up to 3,800 transactions per second. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you should write out blockchain. It's perfectly valid for payment. It's perfectly valid for loyalty. It's perfectly valid for fraud protection and a few other applications like that. So we are actively looking into that as well. I'd like to wrap up the presentation talking about what is next. I'm going to go back and start with the Gartner slide. This is the Gartner hype chart, the hype cycle that I had mentioned earlier. But one of the things that Gartner does, they actually went back and mapped all the emerging technologies. And you can go, if you subscribe to Gartner, you can actually get this report. And so they go back and put all the emerging technologies on what we call as a hype cycle. As you can see, one of the key things you're going to see, most of the emerging technologies that they put on the hype cycle, not one of them have been on the upward slope yet, right? Which is where they're seeing the ROI or the return on investment yet. But that is a typical cycle. But some of these emerging technologies will come out of the cycle, and you will and will end up on the plateau at some point in time. So, and we expect that most of these emerging technologies, we will know the future in terms of whether it's ready for mainstream or not in the next 2 to 5 years, right? So it's kind of an interesting slide in terms of what they are talking about here. So in the context of the same presentation from Gartner, they talk about democratized AI. It's very important to keep in mind that AI and machine learning is here to stay. If you look at the advances in AI and machine learning over the last decade, they have been very, very significant compared to AI and machine learning 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I actually tried using the first generation neural nets to do demand forecasting for revenue management. And it actually failed for many reasons. I won't go into the details behind it. But today we'll be dealing with fourth generation neural nets. So there have been a lot of significant advances in the context of travel. The way you need to think about AI and machine learning is that there are three major categories, right? You've got process automation, cognitive insight, and cognitive engagement. They're all important, but most of the focus in other industries has been on the first one, is process automation. We've actually spent some time on process automation as well, where we think there's an opportunity to revamp all of our applications by using pattern recognition techniques that can improve, enhance productivity of our products. We also tend to focus on cognitive insight and cognitive engagement, which is some of the things I explained to you in the context of intelligent retailing, right? So the other thing to keep in mind is conversational interfaces. They're also gaining an importance. We think there's a place for chatbots, digital assistants, and when you think about the airport of the future, smart robots also have a place in that world. It's important to keep in mind. The second one is the digitalized ecosystems. A good example of that is an experimental technology in terms of its impact on travel. So the one that comes to my mind is blockchain. As I explained to you earlier, we see a lot of potential for blockchain in the context of payments, fulfillment, CRM loyalty systems, fraud protection. There's a lot of value there. We are currently evaluating about 6 or 7 different use cases back at Sabre, besides interline ticketing. One of the things that we are looking into is, if you think about the world of contracts between airlines and agencies, it's very complicated, and there's a lot of contracts out there. If you look at a large travel agency, they deal with multiple contracts, one with each airline. A different contract for front-end commissions, a different contract for back-end commissions or override commissions, and so on. So we are looking into blockchain technology to simplify the whole process and streamline the whole process in terms of how contracts are created, how you arrive at consensus when a contract is changed, and how do you execute on the contracts. So this is becoming very important. The third one is what we call as do-it-yourself biohacking. In some ways, this is far out there, and the application of travel is somewhat limited at this point in time. You have heard about using natural language processing. Examples are like Watson using natural language processing to basically process medical journals and then recommend a cure to cancer patients. As most of you know, there have been lots of experiments in terms of being able to recommend treatment to people, but they have all failed over the last many years. It doesn't mean it will fail in the future, but at this point in time, you don't have a high enough success rate to say it's meaningful. Many of you may have read the Harvard Business Review article about the MD Anderson Cancer Research Institute, where they spent 5 years on enabling automated detection and recommendation for cure for cancer patients that never worked out. The conclusion they came to was that they needed to take them in bite-sized pieces as opposed to boiling the ocean. But there are some other cases like augmented reality and virtual reality, which I think can go a long ways to solve it, to help address this area, which I think is closer to reality. This is an important area. This is also defined by Gartner. They call it transparently immersive experiences, right? So one of the key things that's going to happen, or is happening, is that data can actually be used to basically connect people, their devices, to platforms as well as to sensors, so you essentially can have a seamless experience. I'm sure many of you have heard of iBeacons. Back in 2014, just about every baseball stadium in the United States implemented iBeacons, which is basically sensors across the stadium for consumers to have a better experience. This was an interesting first step, because what it basically did was they provided promotion codes, promo codes, to customers on their mobile devices based on proximity, right, in terms of whether they're sitting in the stadium. Recently I was reading up on if you look at the Edinburgh airport in Scotland, they actually have deployed sensors so they can actually monitor queues and determine how many people they need to staff the lines with to speed up people coming in and out of the airport. So I think there's a long way. So I think there are a lot of opportunities here as well based on connectivity. And last but not least is infrastructure. Infrastructure is, there are different types of infrastructure we are talking about. A good example is quantum computing, right? There's a lot of hype today on quantum computing. So on the hype cycle, this is the very start of the hype cycle. So we have done a lot of work looking at the quantum computing to solve some of the world's largest problems, such as crew pairing, crew optimization, crew rostering, gate assignment. The conclusion we came to is that quantum computing is not ready for prime time at this point in time. They have a long ways to go before we can actually start using it. So we actually have a negative result, and we presented this at the Agricos conference last October. Interestingly, it won the Best Innovation Award, even though it was a negative result. The people wanted to know, because quantum computing, when it eventually works, problems that take hours to run should be solved in minutes, and that's where the power of quantum computing lies. But there's some other examples, like 5G networks. Now that's reality, right? There are many locations that are already 5G enabled, and with increased bandwidth and speed, you can actually help a lot of travel applications like augmented reality, virtual reality, and such, right? It could play a role. And finally, I'd like to end the talk by basically saying that we're actually quite excited about the future of travel. I think we are living in a very exciting time. There are lots and lots of changes happening in the travel industry. What is most important is to be able to adapt to everything that is going on, and make sure that we are in a position to provide the right solutions to customers to benefit them. So this is actually a very exciting time. When I look at the airline industry for the last 30 years, and I've been around for 30 years, I think this is like the most exciting time I've ever noticed, mainly because of the degree of activity. It's not just NDC. It's NDC plus a lot of other things, as I had mentioned, that are happening in the airlines, in the travel space. Thank you.